What's up everyone, Darcblade here with another Hunter's Guide to Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. In this video, we're going to be bringing you another endgame build, this time again for the bow. Now what is an endgame build? Well, it's a build that is constructed from some of the rarest armor, weapons and decorations in the game. They also feature curious crafting as they are endgame builds, but I try not to get the absolute rarest of skills on every single piece of armor involved in the builds. Now as always, if you enjoy these videos or find them helpful, informative or even entertaining, please consider leaving a like on it, as well as subscribing to the channel, as I try to bring you a variety of builds for a variety of different playstyles. Now when it comes to the bow in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, like I always say, it is a very powerful elemental DPS weapon. However, it is a fragile weapon, meaning that rarely can you take hits. Now, most of the time when it comes to the bow, a lot of meta builds, shall we say, utilize skills such as Berserk to allow bow users to not only increase their DPS thanks to skill synergy, but also add survivability to this fragile weapon. However, not everyone likes the Berserk playstyle and having to manage your health gauge as much as you do when using the skill. And so, with that, I present to you an alternative build, which I like to call the Heaven Sent Defensive build. This build gives the bow survivability that is not tied to the Berserk skill, whilst at the same time allowing them to still make use of certain DPS skills and potentially infinite stamina. This build is definitely aimed for players who want a more traditional bow playstyle. So for the Heaven Sent Defensive build, you'll need the Tempest Crown, the Tempest Robes, the Tempest Sleeves, Flaming Espinas Bows, and the Tempest Hakama. For your Petalace, I would recommend the Absolute Petalace for extra health, and then for your Talisman, you'll need a Talisman with as much weakness exploit on it as possible. Constitution is also a nice bonus, and some decoration slots. Tier 2 or above are normally desired. Now, when it comes to the bows, this is an interchangeable elemental bow build, so it can get away with using any of the elements with minimal changes to the actual build. For the demonstration and purpose of this video, I'll be showing off a dragon build utilizing the Silver Striker, which is the primordial Malzeno bow. This also gives us a ton of decoration slots, which the other bows may not have. However, you should still be able to use the other elements. For example, if you wanted to use Thunder, I'd recommend either the Zenoga or the Narwhal bow. For Ice, I'd recommend the Kushala Daora bow. For Water, the Royal Ludroth bow. For Fire, the Ratna Kadaki bow. But failing that, you can get the various elements from the Banahabra trees, including Fire, Ice, Thunder, and Dragon bows. As for the curious crafting on the bows, go for increasing the Rampage decoration slot if the bow you're using doesn't already have a tier 3 decoration slot on it. Afterwards, simply go for increasing the bow's elemental value. Anyway, next up is the decorations. Now, there are a lot of decorations here, and like I said, as we're using the primordial Malzeno bow, you may not have access to all these decoration slots. However, you should still be able to produce similar results using the other bows that I mentioned previously. So, first of all, I've gone for Blade Scale Jewels for a few points in the Blade Scale Hone skill. I've then gone for Physical Jewels to max out Constitution. Remember, if you're using a different bow though, Constitution may be at level 3, in which case you can top it off with Dash Juice if you so desire. I've then gone for Dragon Jaws to max out Dragon Attack. Remember, if you're going for a different bow with a different element, you replace these Dragon Jaws to match whatever new element you are using. So say you're using a Thunder bow, you'd replace Dragon Jaws with Bolt Jaws instead. For your Rampage decoration slot, I've gone for Elemental Bane to increase our elemental damage against monsters who have a elemental weakness hit zone of 25 or above. You can swap this out for anti-species decorations if you so desire. Afterwards, I've gone for Pierce Jaws to max out Pierce up. As this build is more about survival, we're going to be keeping our distance away from monsters, thus I'm using piercing bows over spread bows or rapid bows. If you wanted to use a spread or rapid bow, then you can replace these pierce jaws if you so wish. Then go for Mighty Bow Jaws to max out Bow Charge Plus, Protection Jaws to max out Divine Blessing, Jumping Jaws to max out Evade Extender, Element Exploit Jaw for a few points in the Element Exploit skill, Cornerstone Jaws to max out Defiance, Crit Element Jaws for a few points in Critical Element, Refresh Jaws to max out Stamina Surge, and then an Intrepid Jaw to max out Intrepid Heart. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with a raw attack of 370 with a dragon rating of 100. You have 0% base affinity, which can be 50% when we take into account weakness exploit. This is on the lower end of the scale, to be honest, but this is made up for by the fact that we have quality of life and defensive skills. And then you have an okay defense of 970 that is strong against water, neutral against thunder, but unfortunately weak to the other elements, especially dragon. When it comes to the switch skills, these are down to personal preference, but I will recommend taking dodgeball all the time with the bow to allow us to counter monster attacks, but the choice is up to you. Now, when it comes to the skills, first of all you have Dragon Attack at level 5. Dragon Attack is a skill which increases the dragon rating and thus the dragon damage of this build. Remember, if you're using a different bow with a different element, you would replace Dragon Attack with whatever new element you are using. So, like I said, if you're using a Thunder bow, this will be Thunder Attack at level 5 instead. You'll then have Constitution at level 5, which is a skill that reduces the stamina cost of evading and doing certain other actions, which is very useful for the bow. However, it should be noted that Constitution could be wasted if you're able to keep Heaven Sent active all the time, but we'll talk about Heaven Sent in a moment. But nonetheless, Constitution at level 5 provides us some quality of life, and if you have it at a lower rating, you can always top off the effects by using Dash Juice. You'll then have Evade Window at level 5, a skill that increases the invincibility frames when we're performing dodges and such. This does apply to Dodge Bolt. This allows us to more effectively dodge monster attacks. You'll then have Defiance at level 5, which is a wonderful quality of life skill. When a monster becomes enraged, we'll gain increased defenses, including becoming immune to monster roars, wind pressure, and tremor attacks. You'll then have Critical Boost at level 3, a skill which increases the damage of our attacks whenever they crit a monster, but only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental portion. You'll next up have Weakness Exploit at level 3, which is a skill that increases our affinity by up to 50% when we're attacking monster weak points. This is our main affinity skill. You'll then have Stamina Surge at level 3, a skill which increases how quickly we can recover our stamina. This is very useful for quality of life and stamina management when Heaven Sent isn't in effect. You'll then have Pierce Up at level 3, increasing the damage of piercing arrows. Remember, if you're using a different bow that has a different arrow type, you can replace Pierce Up to match whatever new arrow type you are using, but I went with piercing arrows because it allows us to keep our distance more effectively from monsters and doesn't require us to put ourselves in danger as much. You'll then have Divine Blessing at level 3, again another defensive skill, which gives us a chance that when we take a hit from a monster, that hit will deal reduced damage, up to 50% less damage. It is a gamble, but sometimes it does really come in clutch. You'll then have Evade Extender at level 3, a skill which increases the distance at which we dodge and evade, a skill that I would recommend getting at least at level 1 on pretty much any build in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. You'll then have Charge Master at level 3, which when performing charged attacks, which does apply to the bow rotations, it will grant us increased elemental attack as well as status buildup. You'll then have Heaven Sent at level 3, one of the namesakes of this build. Heaven Sent is a buff that kicks in, indicated via Whirlwind, around our hunter when we've been fighting a large monster for a set amount of time, normally around 30 seconds, without taking any damage. When this happens, should we take a hit from a monster, when this is in effect, we'll have reduced stamina consumption, and should we take a hit, that hit will deal reduced damage. On top of that, at level 3, when Heaven Sent is in effect, we'll gain infinite stamina. And whilst this means that Stamina Surge and Constitution will be nullified on this build, there'll be times when you do take a hit, or a monster moves far away from you and the buff deactivates, so for quality of life I still went for the Constitution and Stamina Surge skills. Anyway, next up is Critical Element at level 2, increasing the damage of our attacks whenever they crit a monster, but applies to the elemental portion of an attack. You'll then have Blade Scale Hone at level 2. This may not be available on all versions of this build if you're using different elements, but Blade Scale Hone is a skill that when we perfectly time a dodge or evade, it will increase the damage of close range coatings. Good for prolonged fights when you run out of power coatings. You'll then have Element Exploit at level 2, allowing our attacks to deal increased elemental damage when we're attacking monster body parts that have a elemental weakness of 20 or above. So against monsters that are resistant to the elements, this may not be the best skill, but for the most part, most monsters have at least one body part that can be taken advantage of with this skill. Anyway, you'll then have Intrepid Heart at level 2, a wonderful defensive skill that gives us an additional blue bar above our health bar. This bar will fill up as we continuously land attacks on a monster, to which when it's full, Intrepid Heart will kick in. After which, should we get hit by a monster that would knock our hunter back, we'll take reduced damage, and on level 2 there will also be a retribution effect, to which an explosion will occur on our hunter, dealing damage to the monster that hit us. Intrepid Heart is also wonderful when paired with Heaven Sent, as Intrepid Heart can prevent us from losing the Heaven Sent buff, thanks to the skill potentially allowing us to ignore a hit, allowing us to keep that infinite stamina for longer periods of time. You'll then have Bow Charge Plus at level 1, an essential skill for all bow builds out there that unlocks all the arrow charge levels for the bows. And then finally you'll have Burst at level 1. A skill which, when we're continuously landing hits on a monster, it will gradually increase our raw attack and elemental attack. So those are all the key skills for this Heaven Sent defensive build. Let's move on to the next section where we talk about the Curious Crafting. Now this is an endgame build, so it is going to feature Curious Crafting. However, with this build, the Curious Crafting isn't that difficult to get. So for the Tempest Crown, I've simply got a point in the Charge Master skill. With the Tempest Robes, I've got a tier 2 decoration slot upgrade. For the Tempest Sleeves, I've got a point in Weakness Exploit and a reduction in the Latent Power skill. For the Flaming Espinasse Bows, I've got a reduction in the Marathon Runner skill and a tier 4 decoration slot upgrade. And for the Tempest Hakama, I've simply got a point in Evade Extender. So it shouldn't be too difficult to get these skills, or get skills that allow you to free up decoration slots, allowing you to create something similar to what is shown here. But, of course, every build out there comes with various pros and cons. No build is absolutely perfect. When it comes to the Heaven Sent defensive build, its biggest pro is its defensive and quality of life aspects, allowing us to normally take a hit without carting instantly. The next pro is this build's damage output. Even though we're not focused on damage as much, this build is still very potent when it comes to taking down monsters at a decent speed, especially if you are countering them with the correct element. And then the final pro for this build is the fact that we have infinite stamina, so long as you can keep the Heaven Sent buff active for as long as possible. But of course there are cons. One of the biggest cons for this build is, unfortunately, you're slightly low on the affinity rating than I would like, but it's not the biggest of issues. And the other con is, unfortunately, against the monsters that are incredibly small and have fewer hit zones, piercing arrows are not always the best. But regardless, if you're looking for a more traditional bow playstyle, I'd strongly recommend this build. It also kind of counters some of the glass cannon aspects that the bow faces in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, allowing you to take hits and not have to rely on the Berserk skill. In fact, not having to rely on the Berserk skill is one of the key aspects of this build, as it means that we don't really have to worry about draining our health or switching between different scrolls when we fight a monster. It also still provides us the infinite stamina, so long as we can keep Heaven Sent, and avoid monster attacks, which can be done quite effectively thanks to Evade Extender, Evade Window, or from the insurance of Intrepid Heart. So I would strongly recommend this build for anyone who is looking for a build that doesn't use the Berserk skill and wants to take on any content that Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak can throw at us. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you another endgame build, this time for the bow in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.